What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back with another episode of the Two Guys Watching Football Training Camp Preview Series for your Baltimore Ravens. If you're enjoying this series, if you enjoyed the first episode and you're looking forward to more, go ahead, click that like button. Let me know that you're enjoying it. And if you want to find your way back for more, please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode drop. Today, we're joined by a great friend of the program, someone that I've had the pleasure to get to know a lot better. It's Pro Football Focus's Gordon McGuinness. Gordon, my guy, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. And you enjoyed the Euro Cup final on Sunday?
I very much enjoyed how it ended. There's an awful lot of people in my very small, very bitter country who were dreading another 55 years of having to hear about our friends down south winning a trophy. So at some point they're going to win one, but as long as we can keep delaying it as long as possible, I'm going to be happy.
Yeah, and I was just telling Gordon off stream, it's been I noticed it. Maybe it's because of COVID and kind of people not having a whole lot to do, but a lot more people in Canada were into Euro Cup, and I expect that to carry over to the World Cup. So I thought it was a great tournament, great for the sport. So it's exciting stuff for the future of the other football, as I like to call it. And so today we're going to be jumping into the quarterback group with Gordon. We're going to run through some of the expectations of year 4 of Lamar Jackson, as well as the backup situation with Tyler Huntley and Trace McSorley both returning to round out the group. Gordon, are you ready to dive right into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So obviously with the quarterback position, there's very little competition for QB1. I mean, we know who's going to be starting for the Ravens at the quarterback position pending health. So this preview is going to probably look a little bit different than the other positional groups, but it gives us a chance to really deep dive into our starter, and that of course is Lamar Jackson. So that's where I want to start with. So when we go back, we look at 2020. After 2019 happened, which was obviously a fun season to watch quarterback play here in Baltimore, where it hasn't been our forte for a position. So Gordon, can you give us a bit of a recap of what you saw from Lamar in 2020 and kind of what you thought coming out of that season?
I think going into the year, I expected some regression, especially from a numbers perspective, because 2019 was, you can make the case that it's the most absurd statistical season by a quarterback of all time. Like the efficiency they had in the passing game to go along with breaking the QB rushing record and things like that. There was always going to be a drop-off. I think even then when you get, the Madden cover and all those things, it's not like a quarterback going through a normal off-season. So I did expect a little bit of a step back. The step back was probably a little bit further back than I expected. But, take into consideration COVID, Lamar himself catching COVID, all those things. And, there's reasons why those things happen. So the interesting thing, I think, when you look at where Lamar is last season and kind of going forward, if last season is his floor, then the Ravens are fine at quarterback as long as he's healthy for, the next decade. If last season, maybe he kind of fluctuates between being a little bit or somewhere between there in 2019, maybe he can drop a little lower than that. That's when they're going to have seasons where things aren't perfect. But worst case scenario with Lamar, as long as he's healthy, you're going to get some seasons out of him that is going to be, elite level play that's going to have the Ravens contending in the playoffs again. And I think if I had to hedge a bit one way or another, I think last season's probably closer to his floor than it is any kind of average that we're going to see in his career.
I found it really interesting to kind of watch, and I'm going to focus on him right now as a passer based on 2020, just kind of what I saw, and that's from a lot of watching the offensive line play, which is where I focus a lot of my time. And in the first game, the Cleveland Browns Week 1 game, the protection was awful. I think he had it was an absurd amount of throws under pressure, and he still played quite well. And it was kind of like he moving on from that game, and it almost seemed like he had a really hard time trusting his pocket. And it was something that he wasn't able to shake until I kept marking it as the Colts game, where he kind of started to seem a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. And it was just kind of like, it was weird behavior because there would be no rush and he would still kind of react as if there was one. But then when there was a rush, it seemed like he could not get comfortable. And, I have to say, based on what I watched from the O-line, we had a literal rotation going on at right tackle, which I've said, I coach youth football. We do that all the time. I've never seen an NFL team do it. So, when you factor in the injuries, guys moving around, the only guy that played all 16 games was Bradley Bozeman at left guard. I think the thing that impacted Lamar Jackson the most in 2020 was his distrust of his pass protection. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the pass protection was always bad and it was only on the offensive line. I don't think that's fair to say. There's that kind of working relationship, right? The QB has to trust the O-line. And like I said, there were plays where there was no pressure, but Lamar was acting as if it was. And it just seemed like he couldn't get his feel set.
Yeah, and I think as well, like to add into that, the quarterback and the O-line, pressure kind of goes hand in hand there. But also it comes down to the offense and the offensive coordinator as well. If there is mistrust between the quarterback and the offensive line, or you have an offensive line that's struggling, you need to put more focus into quick passing options and things like that, where you can get the ball out the quarterback's hands quickly, do things that get them in a nice rhythm and stuff like that. So there's loads of stuff there that I think Lamar can work on to be better. I think the offensive line in general is going to help that. But also, from a coaching standpoint, they just have to understand if there is a game where he's not comfortable, how they deal with that.
And I think you're nailing one of my biggest takeaways. And I mean, talking about Lamar is tough right now. Like it's like every time you have a conversation about him, extremes get taken, and it's kind of like thought school. Like you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's been hard to kind of get everyone to just kind of like objectively, like, let's just talk about it. And I think the reality is the quarterback position is one that is probably influenced by every other aspect around them more than any other position in the game. And you're right. It's the play calling, it's the receivers, his inability to, there's guys not running the right routes that factors into distrust. And the best way to explain how I thought the entire offense was in 2020 was it was just out of sync. And it was just kind of like, one play, maybe there was a missed throw, but then on the next play, there was a perfectly placed throw, but the pass protection was bad, so it didn't come out on time. And then the next play it's a drop, and it's like it's hard to just nail one aspect, but the whole group was out of sync. And I think you're bang on. If that's our floor, I feel pretty good about that moving forward with Lamar Jackson at the helm.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well, the thing you said there, like the talking about Lamar thing is just everyone, people don't really in general, not even about things that they're really passionate about, like Lamar Jackson. In general, we're especially in social media, people are in this thing whereby they can't really accept people having like a different opinion on, something that's not that deep and it's not the biggest thing in the world. And we've seen, like we released our top 50 players heading into this season and Lamar wasn't on there. And I disagree with Lamar not being on there. I think I would have probably had him probably 30, 35, somewhere in that region, based on last season being a little bit of a struggle, because I think he can be like a top 5 guy. But everyone was just, it was this absolute uproar for it. And Sam, who put the list together, he had like the article that went out on guys who missed it, and he had his reasoning for it. And like, it's not, there's reasoning there behind these things. It doesn't have to be, someone disagrees with you on something. Oh, they think Lamar Jackson's the worst quarterback in the world and things like that. So it's always going to be fun when you're talking about a quarterback, I think.
Well, and I think the big thing there, like I'm with you, I disagreed with it, but if someone puts that out there, but then follows it up with a piece that explains why, if there's that step to take, to explain why maybe a more extreme opinion exists and it's supported, it's hard to crap on someone for that. Like, you're allowed to have a differing opinion. You just got to kind of support it when it's an extreme opinion.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how extreme that would be considered, but I mean, from this fan base looking at it, I considered it extreme to not have him on there. But, I'll throw the respect out there. If someone's going to support that opinion, then, we can disagree and we can talk about why we disagree without having to kind of crap on everyone. So,
yeah.
I will say I definitely will throw respect towards Sam for doing that part of it, because I think that's a critical piece of it.
The other thing that I think is interesting with that is that, like, those lists that we've put out of like the top 50 players, we've always been like, when we do those lists, is we're not, if you just went by, most important positions, the top 20 would all be quarterbacks. And, it's not, it then just becomes a list of quarterbacks. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. We've always put out lists which are like, okay, and this list we might weight quarterbacks more, but in this list we're putting out all positions are equal with the exception of kickers. We're not looking at kickers and punters in this list. We're looking at offensive and defensive players, and we're considering all positions equal in those things. And that at that point, all of a sudden you're saying, okay, well, there was only like 5 quarterbacks on there. So Sam's saying that he'd have Lamar, QB6, QB7. That's not that extreme an opinion, but when you look at it as like, oh, he's not in the top 50 players, it becomes this, big, terrible thing.
Yeah, no, and we're talking about a sport where there's 24 starting positions. It gets tough to kind of list people, right? So, it's one of those things. It's been an interesting off season between PFF and the Ravens fan base, and and like that's what it's all about to me anyway. It's all about getting to know the people rather than just knowing someone's brand or the site they write for. And you and I have agreed on things, we've disagreed on things. The big thing that underlies, we're able to talk about it and have an actual conversation. And it's not really criticizing any side of this argument, but I'm hoping we can get to a day on NFL Twitter where we can have a little bit better discourse than but I'm not going to hold my breath for that one. But
no.
So, I think we're both on the same page in terms of 2020. We both see it as kind of Lamar's floor. We both kind of see some of the factors for why. So I guess the big question is, what to expect going into 2021, because this is a pivotal season. It's kind of getting to the end of the rookie contract where you have the upside of having open cap space. I think the Ravens have done a pretty good job of utilizing that cap space as much as possible. Especially shoring up the defense and taking care of some critical pieces there. And we've also put some key pieces into the offense now. I'm finally at the day where I don't have to pray for Josh Gordon to finally get rid of his substance abuse issue and join the Ravens and become a diamond in the rough. I'm beyond those days. I don't even have to think about it. But how do you see 2021 going, and where do you think the biggest improvement for Lamar Jackson needs to be?
I think I'll start off with the biggest improvement because I think that probably ties into kind of where I think it can go. He still has to improve outside the numbers. Like if you look at how he is, he's far better between the numbers. I largely think that the supporting cast has at least a small impact, if not a bigger impact on that, though, because if you look at his numbers and where he is better, it's across the middle of the field, where he has Mark Andrews, who is one of the top 4 or 5 tight ends in football, if not pushing that top 3. Outside at wide receiver, they have had young guys and older players who were not established superstars. Coming into this season, the trio at the top of the Ravens wide receiver group in Sammy Watkins, Marquise Brown, and Rashad Bateman. I'm not going to say they are going to be the best trio of receivers the Ravens have ever had, because there's not anyone in that group yet that's proved they are a Derek Mason, Anquan Bolden, Steve Smith, that type of guy. But it's definitely in the realms of possibility that this is the best trio of wide receivers, and then also even beneath them, the guys they have as the complementary guys. Miles Boykin going from being your number 2 to your number 4, like all of a sudden, I think he's probably like an upper upper wide receiver 4 in the NFL. I don't think he was necessarily a guaranteed wide receiver 2. So, those are things that I think can have a big impact. I think Sammy Watkins can have a huge impact on the outside just because he's going to be able to beat people deep. Lamar can find him down there. And I think Rashad Bateman was like the dream player for the Ravens to get in this draft for me, because what they lacked as an offense was that type of wide receiver who can do some damage on the outside, is going to go up there and win the ball. Lamar's not the most consistent quarterback in the world. He's not perfectly accurate all the time. He can throw some absolute dimes, but there's times where he's a little bit high, a little bit low, and that doesn't always suit a Marquise Brown. Whereas I think Rashad Bateman, if he takes what he did in college into the NFL, he is the type of guy that will go and extend the catch point and do all those things. So I think if Rashad Bateman can hit the ground running, and if we get the good version of Sammy Watkins, I think at that point, the offense is going to go as far as Lamar can take it in a passing sense. And I think we're going to start to get a really good indication of how he is developing as a passer in that sense.
Yeah, I think you nailed a key point for me. The guys like Devin Duvernay and Miles Boykin and even a Tylan Wallace, rather than, being thrusted into starting spots, you can kind of use them as weapons off the bench. And, it not only allows them to kind of, especially the younger guys, not necessarily Boykin, but it allows them to a little bit more comfortable spot to develop and they're not thrust into action right away. But a guy like Duvernay, like, you could now use him as a Swiss Army knife, and he takes that focus of the defense. So, that it's going to open up other areas of the game. Like, it's one of those things, if you go back and you watch how teams played Lamar with cover 3 or even some cover 2, the concepts that we've seen, if they're going to have to stack the box and then just leave 3 defenders back to protect deep, well, if you can open up those intermediate breaking routes to the sidelines, which I think is something Bateman could do really well out of the slot. I know he did 2 years ago at Minnesota. He played out of or last year, whatever year it was, where he played out of the slot. Like, he did a really good job on some of those outside breaking routes. And that's something where a ghost concept where they're running a 9 from the outside receiver and then an out into that empty space. Like, that can just be easy money for Lamar to get comfortable, getting a rhythm, that type of stuff. So I think the big thing for me, it's going to be getting Lamar into a rhythm early. I find that even in a game, like, if they can come out with some short concepts and just kind of get that first drive rolling, it helps Lamar settle in, get the nerves out. And I mean, it's like that I used to say that with Joe all the time. Like, it helps any quarterback to get in a rhythm early. And so, the weapons around him, I think, can go a long way in helping him exploit some of the things that we haven't been able to in the past based on personnel. So like you said, it's not necessarily like Lamar needs to be sharper in those areas. I don't think anyone disagrees, but now there's guys that can go out there and actually make those plays when he does throw some of those dimes.
Yeah, I love the point about using players as Swiss Army knives as well. I would love to see like Duvernay drifting in and out of the backfield, using him in ways like that, because the Ravens' biggest asset is the fact that Lamar Jackson puts defenses in such a bind, and you can see the impact in the Ravens' running game because players have to respect, he might keep the ball and everyone has to be so disciplined. That also leaks over into the passing game as well. And I think, using play action even more than they already do. They use it a significant amount, but they can dial it up even more. Lamar's great off of play action, but you can have those playmakers sliding in and out of the backfield, getting some little jet motion plays coming in there. You can then pivot off of those with some play action rollouts and things like that, and do things in that middle part of the field that keeps defenses very honest. And at that point, all it needs is for the outside guys to be what they have been brought in to be. The reason why they've drafted those guys high, the reason why they've gone out and signed Sammy Watkins is they need those guys to win outside. If the Ravens can cause chaos in that middle of the field and, make things really tough for opposing defenses and those receivers win on the outside, it becomes a very, very difficult offense to stop.
That's it. How do you stack the box and protect deep and, take away the middle of the field, or, double Andrews the way we've seen, the primary way I think I've seen a team like the Steelers play them is it's like, okay, we're going to stack the box. We're going to charge the mesh point on any sort of veer concepts, try and get Lamar to keep it, and then bring our DBs down. But if they're able to kind of turn that into a play action and those DBs coming down creates one-on-ones and the receivers can actually make them pay, that's going to have to change how everyone plays them. And it's kind of that X factor that I think has been missing in the offense, is just their ability to make you pay on the outside when they cheat on your run game, or they cheat by moving DBs up. And I mean, the Bills did it a ton. They used a bunch of man blitzes to try and cover as many gaps as possible, trying to keep, get Lamar to pass it off while they funneled defenders inside. And so, if we were able to, make them pay outside, I think the Bills would have had to adjust how they played the Ravens last year in the playoff game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that's definitely for me the big key going into this season.
Absolutely. And so, that's Lamar. I think we're both pretty hopeful about Lamar moving forward. I think we both, kind of understand what he needs to do and what his supporting cast needs to do. I think it's kind of one of those weird concepts where I think everybody in Ravens Twitter kind of agrees with. So that's positive. We got some consensus building going. But when you look at the backup situation, we have Trace McSorley and Tyler Huntley, and we were actually able to see them in small samples last year. It was kind of not every year do you get to see both of your backups. We saw Huntley play in the playoffs. We saw Trace come in the Cleveland game when Lamar had to go to the washroom. So, who do you think has the leg up as QB2 behind Lamar Jackson?
So if I had to guess what's going on in the Ravens organization, I would guess that Trace probably has the leg up within the organization. If I was going with what I would do, it would be Tyler Huntley. I think he is, and this is not to suggest that he's remotely the player that Lamar Jackson is, but a lot of the stuff he does is kind of like Lamar Jackson, but dialed down to like about 60%. Like he's not the dynamic, 1,000-yard rusher that Lamar is going to be, but he can be an effective running quarterback in the NFL. He's not, he doesn't have the kind of wow throws that Lamar has, but he can still make some throws. We saw when he came in the Buffalo game, as much as that game seemed like it was, getting away from them, there were points in that game where, I think it was the Pittsburgh game actually, like late in that game, made throws that were right there. It was very, a couple of inches away from a big deep completion. So I really like what he can offer. And I also think your backup quarterback in the NFL, from a playing on the field perspective, I think they have to be players who can make teams suffer on the ground as well, because you lose so much going from your starting quarterback to your backup quarterback. They're not going to be as good a passer. They're not going to have the same familiarity with the wide receivers. So if they have something that's like an edge, we saw when Lamar came in his rookie season, the passing game just wasn't there, but the Ravens were still able to win almost every game the rest of the regular season and go to the playoffs because what Lamar could do as a runner was just, something that defenses couldn't account for. So that's probably why I'm in the Tyler Huntley camp on that front.
Yeah, and I actually tend to agree. I haven't been very I think Trace McSorley has done an admirable job in terms of his decision making. I think that's been really solid, especially on some of the running concepts. And we know he did quite a bit of that at Penn State, but he's just not the athlete that Huntley is, and I don't even think he's quite the thrower that Huntley is. So I see him as a lesser player to Huntley. And that kind of leads me into my next question. So I have a strong opinion on this. It's something that I've had a lot of healthy discussions on Twitter about. I'm curious about getting your thoughts. So I've been saying, and I'm still in the camp, that I don't think it makes sense to carry 3 QBs on the 53-man roster. So my rationale for that is that I don't think, because I'm in agreement that Huntley's QB2, I don't think the difference between Trace McSorley will provide enough of an upgrade over a practice squad guy. And I should note that, McSorley could possibly be that practice squad guy, that it justifies exposing a better player at a different position to either practice squad or a guy gets cut because of it. So, I know it's quibbling over the last few spots on the 53-man roster, but, that's my opinion. So what do you think of that?
I agree. And if you look at the way the Ravens drafted this year, I kind of have to believe that they probably will only keep 2 QBs in the active roster. If you look at the Ben Mason pick, for example. So unless, and it's entirely possible, there's like a small injury that leads to injured reserve for him in preseason, where they drafted him, I feel like they're probably going to keep him in the active roster. And, they're not going to, he's not going to be the starting fullback. We've seen the Ravens absolutely dominate up there, and for some reason his name has just completely gone from my head now.
Ricard?
There we go, Ricard, that's it. Just a huge dominant force in there that has such a key role in what they do in the running game. They even started to get him a little involved in the passing game. So I have a hard time believing that one of those, both of those guys aren't going to be in the active roster unless there is some sort of injury there. And at which point, if you're keeping 2 fullbacks on the active roster, you start to very quickly, that's another position whereby from an importance level, it is further down there. The Ravens, we know, like to use tight ends quite a lot. Probably keep an extra tight end there. Defensive backfield, the Ravens are one of the smartest teams in the NFL, so they know how important it is to have as many defensive backs as possible. You start to add up all those things, and the numbers start to very quickly not really be there for a quarterback. So yeah.
And I think it's especially important because a lot of those guys that you're mentioning, it's kind of those last tight end guys, those last wide receiver guys, those last DB guys, they're also key special teams players. And unless Trace McSorley is going to play special teams, which, I do remember people being like, maybe you can be a Taysom Hill guy, but, we haven't seen that. I'm not going to say that's going to happen. But, to have 3 QBs, 2 of which, they can maybe come in and save you a game in terms of they're not going to lose it for you. But if the reality is, if Lamar Jackson's out long-term, the season's probably going down the drain. I mean, a lot of teams have to face that reality. Huntley, if he develops a little bit, maybe not, but this is this is the way I've been putting it, is if there's a situation next year where I'm like, oh crap, I really wish we had Trace McSorley on this football team, I'll just be very surprised, because you're pretty much protecting against 2 starting quarterbacks getting hurt, where they're going to save you that one game. But then, moving forward, Trace McSorley is probably not going to win you a whole lot of games. So, I think you can get a quarterback on that practice squad, from someone else that's gotten cut, that can kind of provide that running ability. Because I completely agree, it is an aspect from a backup that can be, I actually haven't heard someone make that point, but the way you put it was actually really good. Like it provides a different element with a lesser thrower. So at least it gives you some sort of a competitive advantage. And it kind of explains why Tyrod Taylor, hung around the Ravens for so long, despite being such a different player than Joe Flacco.
Yeah, I just think there's something to, if you can give defenses something that keeps them honest and something that takes them out of their comfort zone a little bit, rather than, okay, we're going up against the same offense and, it's just a lesser passer, so we're just going to do exactly what we did. We're going to try and pressure them because they're going to struggle with that. If you can just have something whereby, there's enough athleticism there to keep them honest, it gives you the opportunity to cause a little bit of chaos in those situations. And I think as well, like your kind of starting point when your starting QB goes down should probably be, we're in trouble. Your expectations should be low at that point. So, I also think if you can get a young guy in there, you maybe, you find something that you can then flip for a draft pick in the future as well.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, no, I'm glad we have the same take, that we're in line there. And I mean, some people have made some really good arguments. Like, it is hard to discount Trace too much, because he did step in and he didn't crap his pants, and that it isn't some small feat that shouldn't be factored in. Like, he remained composed, he made good decisions, he even made a couple throws. Nothing too crazy, but he got the job done. He actually, his numbers, which I did quote his numbers to someone, and then I went back and watched the film, and he did suffer from 2 drop balls, which were pretty well placed balls, so it kind of tanked his completion percentage.
Yeah.
And I'm big on full disclosure. I'm not here to try and manipulate anyone. So when you look at his 40% completion percentage last year on such a small sample size, obviously catching those 2 drops makes a huge difference and makes everything look a lot better. So, that's pretty much all I had for you. Do you have any kind of last comments on the quarterback situation?
I think, I don't know. Like, I think your Trace McSorley point there is perfectly good. Like, I don't, as much as I would have Huntley as my QB2, I don't think there's like a sizable gap, in the sense that, it's also the backup quarterback position. So if come, August 15th, whenever it is that cutdowns happen, if Trace McSorley's QB2 in Baltimore, I'm not going to be upset about it. It's not, it's not going to cause me any sleepless nights. But yeah, we know this team is going to go as far as Lamar can take it. We know that what he has shown that he's capable of is something that is just not done by anyone else. There was a clip from one of our podcasts this week, and Nate Tice was a guest on it. Nate, who is Mike Tice's son, I think it is. And it was either him or his dad compared Lamar to like Randy Moss playing quarterback, in the sense that it's just something that is so different from what anyone else can do. There are other really good athletes at quarterback in the NFL. Josh Allen's a good runner. Kyler Murray's a good runner. There are players who can do things with their legs. There's no one who does the things that Lamar Jackson does. The scramble against the Titans in the playoffs, the long run against the Bengals with the spin, like, these are things that no one else can come close to. And they're the things that, if Lamar has that type of season again, the Ravens are Super Bowl contenders. If Lamar has even somewhere between 2020 and 2019, they're Super Bowl contenders again. You know, it's a good roster that if they get good quarterback play, they'll be fine. If they get great quarterback play, they're a huge problem for the rest of the NFL.
You can't put it any better than that. It really is the reality. And I think a big thing built into the Lamar Jackson discourse that's out there is, you know, how drastic he changed from 2018 into 2019 and some of the strong opinions. And then it kind of turned this into a huge dichotomy of, you know, hot takes going both ways. And then 2020 is the inevitable regression, but like regression is kind of on that bell curve where it's like it's a regression, but not necessarily where it was poor QB play, but people would still say the word regression and then everybody would freak out. And so it's just been a world of extremes out there. And I literally just tweeted today, like I'm at the point where when I see some of the silliness out there, I used to get so upset and start arguing with people on Twitter about when someone's like, Lamar Jackson can't throw. Now I just don't care. Like, I know we can. I don't really need to prove it anymore. You know, there's way better uses of my time. We can talk about, you know, Lamar Jackson throwing consistently and where he can improve. Like, let's focus on more tangible discussions than this whole silly, he's a running back, he can't throw. But, you know, Gordon, I can't thank you enough for spending your time with us today. It's always a pleasure to pick your brain and get your expertise on all things Raven. So Gordon's work can be found out there at pff.com and on Twitter at pff_Gordon. You know, thank you so much again. And if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe so you can find your way back, turn on notifications so you know when an episode drops. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.